It's really beautiful, this land that straddles the border between southern Ethiopia and northern Kenya, but it's a dry land and it's getting drier. For hundreds of years, pastoral people have lived here with their herds of cattle, sheep, and goats. But in the last 20 years, droughts have become more frequent and more severe. And of course, there's more and more competition and conflict over dwindling resources. We've come here to look at a project called PARIMA, which stands for Pastoral Risk Management. The idea of the project is to help people diversify away from their complete dependence on livestock. If they can find a way to do that, to find other sources of livelihood, hopefully they'll be able to stay here for hundreds of more years. My guide to southern Ethiopia and to the project was Dr. Solomon Desta, a very popular man in southern Ethiopia, and well he should be. Solomon first came to work with the pastoralists of the region almost 30 years ago. He knows the people well, and they know him well too. Solomon's long years of experience with pastoralists and rangeland management helped shape PARIMA into a different kind of development project, and a very successful one. In the village of Malab, one of the PARIMA project areas, Solomon told me about the challenges the pastoralists of southern Ethiopia face and how PARIMA had addressed them.
The whole Boron Plateau, which is used to be the prime rangeland in Ethiopia, very productive rangeland in Ethiopia. It's becoming really very dry and hot. The whole environment is changing. Drought is becoming a recurrent phenomena. In the old days, drought used to happen once every 8-10 years, but now it's happening every other year.
Solomon told me that droughts regularly decimate between 40 and 60% of the livestock on the Boron Plateau. For people who depend completely on their animals, that's a devastating toll. And, as if drought and degradation of pastures weren't enough to deal with, the human and animal populations have been growing rapidly in the past few decades. That puts even more pressure on the dwindling resources of pasture and water.
It's not only the changing in the environment, there is also that factor of human population. Population is growing. Right. It's getting beyond the carrying capacity of the land.
With little surface water in the best of times and none at all in the dry season, women have to walk, often for several miles, and wait half a day or more just to get water from one of the few boreholes that have been drilled in the area. And the more the population grows, the longer the lines get.
People are coming not only from the other parts of Ethiopia to settle here, even from Somalia. The troubled state next door is there, so they are coming from Somalia. And people are also coming from Kenya, and people from the highland are also coming down here. So the human population is growing, the environment is not favorable, there is no enough pasture and water, drought is very recurrent, so people can't anymore make a living from livestock only.
But getting people to change deeply rooted traditions is not easy.
They have been doing livestock for centuries. Their grandparents were doing the livestock for centuries. So they did not have any idea of other economic opportunity to support their livelihood.
Sponsored and funded by the Global Livestock CRSP and the USAID Ethiopia mission, PARIMA began in 1997. The GL-CRSP had already sponsored a year and a half of regional research and discussions. It was from these that risk emerged as a predominant theme. The integrated research and outreach was led by Utah State University in collaboration with many international and national partners. PARIMA's first 3 years were spent in research and planning, in listening to the concerns and ideas of the people. PARIMA's success was due to this long-term commitment, to combining research and planning with implementation.
The philosophy behind the activities of the PARIMA was not to focus on technology, but to focus on building the human capacity the capacity of the pastoralists themselves. We were not here just to enhance the livestock production and productivity. We were here, we were trying, to build their capacity and to help them diversify their livelihood.
The first stage was to organize village cooperatives called collective action groups. Group members received training in setting up and running small shops, in better ways to market their livestock, and in other types of small businesses. And they attended classes in literacy and numeracy. The third leg of the PARIMA project was microfinancing.
Our approach regarding microfinance is a little bit different from several other NGOs. We are not, we don't encourage a credit-led microfinance activities. We encourage a saving-led. There are people who say, poor people cannot save because they don't have enough. But we are not in that school of thought. We say, poor people, okay, they are poor, but they have some. It could be small. They can start saving 10 cents, 25 cents. So they had to raise their own savings first, and seed capital comes later. The money that comes from PARIMA, it's given at a later stage. Capital alone, it doesn't help to change people's life. You need to build their capacity. They should know how to use that money.
That people were learning how to use that money was clear as we visited with some of them in the project areas. Tuni Kersa was destitute. She'd given her daughter to another family to take care of and could only make money by walking 30 kilometers to a town to buy a jerry can of locally brewed beer, carrying the heavy can back, and sitting under a tree to sell it to villagers. She used loan money from PARIMA for a small shop, which is now thriving. Her 4 children are all in school, and she is the treasurer of her cooperative. PARIMA changed my life completely, she said. Tari Jarso used PARIMA loan money to start a shop and a mill for grinding maize. Halima Doko, who used her loans to directly market livestock and for petty trading, said the PARIMA project had enabled her to go from darkness into light. Abduba Halaki said that his home area had become a semi-desert, and as a result, there was a lot of fighting over the dwindling resources. He told me of an attack by men with AK-47s and grenades that had killed hundreds of people. Abduba said that he had benefited personally from PARIMA, and that his cooperative had pooled their resources into bigger projects from which everybody gained. But equally as important was that PARIMA had helped establish a peace committee to help resolve conflicts over water and pasture land. He himself is a member of the committee. Every story we heard as we toured the area was inspiring, but none more so than that of Makaya Eden. She now owns a shop and is the president of her cooperative. 2 of her children have graduated university. 1 is studying there, and her youngest is in high school. Life is very good, she told me. It was not always so. Makaya and her family had been forced to flee to Kenya as refugees during the time of Ethiopia's military government. When they returned, they had no animals and no way to make a living. They were destitute. We were so poor and I could do nothing, she said. I was not even recognized as a human being by others. I was nothing. One day, a man offered Makaya a small fee if she would carry contraband goods across the border from Kenya. She and a few others walked across the border to where the goods were stashed. But the others were experienced, she told me. They took the small loads. I was left with the heaviest. And they knew the way. I fell behind and got lost. Makaya staggered through the bush for several hours. Weak and exhausted, she collapsed. Makaya woke up hours later as it was getting dark. I asked if she had been afraid of hyenas or other animals that prowl the African night. No, I was not afraid, she said. I did not care if hyenas found me. I wanted to die. Some local villagers found Makaya the next morning and helped her home. Despite this terrible experience, Makaya made several more trips across the border with contraband. I had no choice, she told me. And then PARIMA came along. PARIMA was the seed from which my new life grew, she said. While we were talking, our conversation was interrupted by a sound I'd never heard in 30 years of interviewing people in remote African villages. Makaya pulled a cell phone from the folds of her dress. Her oldest son was calling to check in on her. The phone, like her contentment, was an illustration of how her life had been transformed by the PARIMA project. In all, PARIMA helped form 59 cooperative groups in southern Ethiopia with more than 2,000 members. 76% of them are women. PARIMA and the groups loaned out $648,000. The repayment rate was 96%. But the legacy of PARIMA is larger than those numbers. The project ended direct involvement with the cooperatives in 2009, but the groups continue to function and make loans to their members. The model is sustainable. Equally important is that other villages, seeing the success of their neighbors, have spontaneously formed groups of their own, emulating the PARIMA model and making their own lives more secure.
There was nothing, to stop them. That's what we observed. Once, they accepted the idea and saw, some of possible areas of, diversifying, their activity to generate income from elsewhere, then, things, moved like, a prairie fire everywhere. Everybody started, to diversify.
Certainly, diversification has brought joy and a bit more security to Tuni Kursa and her shop. Abdu Bahalaki received an award from the Ethiopian Prime Minister on behalf of his cooperative. And Makaya Eden has transformed both her life and her family. All of their children are in school. Some will move away to towns and cities to take on new ways of life. Some will return to be pastoralists like their parents. The lessons those parents learned from PARIMA will enable their children to hold on to valued traditions and be part of the modern economy too. They may have found a way to long survive on southern Ethiopia's changing Borana Plateau.